it's such a great pleasure to be at Penn State and to have met with some of you in your studios and to have gone to the seminar last night where we talked a lot about the practicalities of being an artist. And for this show, I'd like to show you the actual stuff that I make to be an artist. And I thought I would start with the image on the poster, which is of an ocean liner jutting out of the wall. And there's some controversy about whether this is actually a sculpture or an object or a three-dimensional painting. It's painted to look like an ocean liner, and I took some liberties, as you can see, placing the two stacks right next to each other. I thought I would talk about this piece of art in relation to some other pieces of art, and then show you my work, starting from early work up to the present time. Since you've been looking at this in the poster, it's from a show where the gallery had these interesting cement walls, and the dealer called this a half boat because, as you can see, I only showed the bow of the boat. And weirdly enough, I lifted up the water to put on the bottom. I painted in the water. It makes no sense, I agree. And I wanted to show you this very well-known masterpiece by Magritte, René Magritte, of a very ordinary living room with inexplicably a locomotive jutting out of the fireplace. Also, you can only see the front. There's no reason it should be there. He, as you know, was a surrealist, so that was what he was after. Super real painting style and very odd subject matter. There's a Magritte show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York now, and this painting is in it. My next work of art that I thought was relevant, you may recognize because it's in the front of this building. When I walked by these wonderful giant paws of a lion that are in the entrance of the building, I recognized immediately a kind of visual wit, because the tradition would be to put the entire lion in front, seriously guarding the building. But these, again, are cropped. You only see a piece of it. And to me, they're benign. They're kind of sweet paws curling over the side. So the mightiness of the lion figure is sacrificed to a very original and surprising view, which took me by surprise. I'm not sure I would have noticed it at all had it been your standard full body lion. And also the fact that it has such a sharp crop, so we can only imagine the rest of the front leg there is behind it. We can only imagine that this is a black, mighty lion figure. We're only seeing a piece of it, like my boat. So that's my art lesson for that. Now I'm going to show you one of my early boat paintings that I painted in the 70s as a young artist. I was interested in the texture of the paint, sky, water, and just the form of the boat. No mast, no rudder, no person. Just a sliver of shape to connect both the sky with the water. This next view is a boat painting that I did recently, and over the years I did away with what didn't interest me about the boat and added what did interest me. I had the boat coming toward the viewer, prow first, because your usual marine boat painting almost always showed it side view. This is either sitting in the harbor or coming towards you, and I have it draped with lights or what might look like white dots. And there's a lot of transparency and layering in the way I put on the paint, because I was very interested in getting a kind of luminous, light-filled, glorious, celebratory ship full of color sitting on the greenest water I could get. So now we'll begin the story. These are two paintings I did in the 70s when I was beginning to paint. I thought of myself as a mark maker, abstract painter, and I'm showing these two paintings to you because I feel in a way I'm still doing them. I love night skies. The painting, the dark painting with the white dots, I called Night Sky, thinking that was very clever. It has a piece of cloth glued to the middle. I still do a lot of night skies and dots. And the painting next to it is an example of how I use symbols that could mean something, like the letter H, or hurdles that you have to jump over to get into the painting, or little beds lined up as in a hospital. So all this makes the painting have several directions that its image could go in. When I began to paint, I was living in Maine, and I had a husband and 2 children and a dog and an organic garden, and we were heating with wood. And I was stacking my wood one day, feeling very frustrated, a feeling I'm sure you all know, because I wanted to be making art instead of doing this chore, which isn't a bad chore, but I was desperate to actually call myself an artist, and I didn't have the time. My life wasn't set up that way quite yet. So I ran into the house and I got 2 stretcher frames and I shoved them in the middle of this pile to make that rectangle. And then I put a piece of white birch log under this rectangle, just so that I could feel that I was creating something, that I wasn't only stacking wood. I didn't go to an undergraduate college that had a studio art program. These were my teachers, my fellow artists. We called ourselves the Union of Maine Visual Artists. I'm in the middle with a dark shirt on. I learned about how to be an artist by watching other artists. And when I was older, in my 40s, I went to get an MFA at SUNY Purchase. So my education has been unconventional, and I've always regretted that I never got what many of you have, which is the fun of being an art student. Parties, camaraderie, and so on. This is where I was painting in Maine. It was a big barn-like building next to the house that I fashioned into a studio. In the winter, I would rent a space over a store, and you can see on the wall what the work I was doing, work on paper with kind of tentative shapes in rows. And one day, I just felt like being purely physical. So I took all the painting supplies in my studio and line them up in rows, neat rows, one after another. Just, do it with your hands. Don't make a drawing. It wasn't very satisfying, so I moved everything to the edge of the room and looked at the bare floor, kind of framed the floor, and then I saw that the space I'd been painting in was actually not a rectangle. There was kind of a wedge shape in the corner that I filled up. So I called this my wedge piece. And soon after that, I moved from Maine to New York City with my 2 kids and began another chapter in my life. Incidentally, if any of you would like to say anything while I'm talking, to ask a question, that would be fine. When I got to New York, I added much more color to my work. My thoughts about color are to use bright primary colors that I like, and to place them one next to each other, almost like stacks. Maybe that's why I like ocean liners, because it gives me the excuse now to do stripes of color as well as those dots. These paintings I did in the 80s. They're small, I'd say, 20 and 30 inches, easel paintings, thickly painted. I did this on a shaped piece of wood. It's called beard. It was always a big challenge for me to do a large painting, this one being 7 feet tall. It was intimidating to stand in front of such a big surface, and I never really had enough paint to cover it. But this is one of my first large paintings. About color, I think, or I was mimicking a game, an imaginary game. I live in Manhattan, and I take the subway to my studio, which is in Brooklyn. Brooklyn was just beginning to become an art community, and I would pass this sign every morning, this guy saying to me, "May I suggest you have that with a schmear?" And I took it as a sign, a personal sign of encouragement to schmear, because that way of painting wasn't very encouraged in those years, in the 80s. The look around me was a very crisp painting. If you used brush and canvas, and it was very painterly with drips and scumbling, layering, all things I loved. It was considered part of the abstract expressionist vocabulary, which was not new. And as you know, contemporary art gets a lot of its value from being fresh, from being totally innovative, like the fashion world. You don't want to do something that's already been done. But this guy was telling me I could do it with a schmear. I spent some time experimenting with the properties of paint, and I made this painting by thinning out the paint and pouring it in these circles, and I called this islands, which tells me that I wasn't ever interested in pure abstraction. And I didn't meet many of you this visit that are interested in pure abstraction, but I felt that my work referred to something in nature. This painting was important to me because when I looked at it, I really admired the kind of light I'd gotten in it, and it looked familiar. And I thought, oh, I know this light. It's a TV light. It's a light that comes from within the painting. It's not sunlight shining on something. It's not light that causes shadows. It's kind of an inner glow, something that Mark Rothko took advantage of with his work. His work was lit from within, almost like looking into a fireplace where you see the coals shining. And I thought that that's what I was after. I would try out sky and land and water. And I found when I put the two dotted bars on either side of this, it began to look like a theater space. And that what I thought was the sea in the foreground looked like rows of seats, much like the seats you're sitting in right now. And that this could be an empty theater looking at kind of a light show. There I stumbled upon another subject, which was the stage. And here I'm giving you a little more space. There's a sense of perspective with the dots going back into the distance. And I put the suggestion of letters and numbers floating across the sky. This was about 1990, before people were texting each other. Now, of course, the sky is filled with letters and numbers going across in the air. But this was something I imagined when I did this work on paper, which is about 15 inches across. Stretched out, I might say, because of this slight distortion that the projector's giving. Here we see some surgeons about to begin an operation, and one of them is saying, "Let's just start cutting and see what happens." And I immediately related to this because surgeons are supposed to know what they're doing before they begin their operation. And I thought that this is what people demand of artists, that they have a plan before they begin their work of art. And I didn't have a plan. I would start painting and see what happens. This was a cartoon I saw in the New Yorker, so I saved it. One day I was painting in my studio and I was kind of mushing the paint around, which is the way I started a painting. And nothing much was happening, so I went and got a comic book. No, not a comic book, it was a coloring book, a vintage coloring book about a bride and groom. And the bride it was from the 50s. She was going to fix up her apartment. So it had one page of her, this woman here, the new bride. She was a painter woman, and she amused me so much because she was a little bit ridiculous. She didn't have the right clothes on. She didn't have the right tools. She was kind of a false painter, and I identified with her. I thought that I wasn't quite there yet, and I was as silly looking as this woman, and so that's why I did this painting. And when my friends came in the studio and looked at it, it was kind of new since I didn't usually put figures in my work. They did something that they had never done before. They stood in front of this painting and they laughed. And I realized that I could be funny as an artist, which was something I hadn't imagined, because I thought if you took on the task of making art that it was rather a grand enterprise and part of a long, serious tradition, and that to use humor was a tool that I hadn't imagined I could employ, although I come from a family that likes to joke around a lot. So I felt at home making fun of things. In this painting, I'm making fun of myself. I think that's one of the best ways to use humor, is self-deprecating humor, not making fun of other groups, but turning it back onto yourself. So I did a series of paintings about figures striving for grace, for power. This is a woman with a kind of superhero cape on. She's trying to fly. She's not really flying. She's hovering in the air, not quite making it, aspiring to another dimension altogether, which was exactly what I was aspiring to, something more. Here I was on the road to figuration, and I didn't know. I said, oh my goodness, I'm going to take on all that baggage of making paintings with people in them. I didn't quite know how I'd do that and still be true to my mark maker vocabulary. I thought maybe if I outlined it like a cartoon in the classic sense of the cartoon. So this swimmer was going to be a flyer, but then I had the body submerged in water, which I've since done many times. So it's about a balance, about a figure who's trying to balance, about the field and the figure, about the natural world and the person. Here it is on the wall next to a painting I did of a chest of drawers in kind of disarray, using thick lines to describe my subject. Then I realized that I actually could describe a figure by the very marks that I'd been used to making. That in fact the mark was the figure. I could make a whole arm, a head, the hair, very simply if I took this very direct approach. This is a small painting, maybe 10 inches across. And I found that if I repeated my marks in almost rows, the way I had loved to do, that it gave the effect of a group of people gathered together. Originally, these black suited people were sitting around a table. But the painting slipped, the control of the painting slipped out of my hands. They seemed to be leaning over a little bit too much. And the table was so blue, it looked like water. So I call this painting Water Drinkers. And various viewers suggested maybe I was making a political comment that men in suits were seen slurping up the resources. Not something I intended, but interpretation that grew after the painting was finished, and that I had to admit that perhaps was there. Using repeating figures so they look like they belong to a team, a tribe, doing something together. And almost describing everything, the surfboards with just color. Figures swimming at night with white bathing caps on. And I decided not to go any farther and describe the faces. I wanted a kind of raw look to an event that I considered somewhat elemental and raw, to be out in the open ocean at night with a strange beam of light. Oh, that light, how I love that light. A circle of swimmers, perhaps a nod to Matisse's very famous painting of the dance, of women with no clothes on, holding hands in a circle. However, these women, I didn't see as muses, as symbols for whatever Matisse, I think he looked at those women as Mother Earth creatures. I saw these women as me and my friends, that perhaps I was there dancing with them. There's a big wave about to burst over them, so maybe they're helping each other. Maybe they're supporting each other from sinking. This painting is about 7 feet tall. And I put this painting in because it shows my process a bit. It began with a blue ground and a kind of red, undefined mass of color, which started to look like a head, maybe a head of red hair. So then I very deliberately painted in arms and a torso, and it seemed to stand like that. I called it Redhead. Philosophers clam bake, because I needed to explain why these guys were in their very serious outfits. I've never been to a philosopher's clam bake, but I know they have them. Can you see on the top of this painting a skyline? So these swimmers are crossing a dark river, perhaps. They're kind of Diana Naiad swimmers. They're survival swimmers. They're going somewhere. They're not leisure time swimmers. They're not your summer frolicking in the sun swimmers. These swimmers have a quest, and that interested me. I didn't want to do summer at play paintings. I wanted to do paintings about a journey, perhaps. And notice that I splatted the paint on to get the effect I wanted. I dropped it on the top of the painting and then proceeded to paint the rest of the painting. The title of this painting is Art Students Dropping Their Paintings into the River. It started out with the bridge shape, and I saw little flecks of white and composed the painting according to that. And the theme seemed important because we all know what it's like to have a lot of stuff. That you might as well drop off a bridge and have it float down the river. It's kind of beautiful. When I return to my barn studio in Maine each summer, I leave myself a note, and these are 2 notes that I left. The one that says, "Be ordinary," was a message that I wanted to get across, not be boring, not be common, but be straightforward, be clear. Don't be highfalutin. And the other one, be trashy, I felt was something I needed to learn because I had been brought up to be polite. And I don't feel that that's necessarily a good thing when you're making contemporary art. I'd been brought up to please other people and to figure out what they wanted. And I was trying to train myself to be a little bit more bold, not necessarily trashy, but why not? You know, I could remind myself that there was another side of life as a woman that I should look at. When I began this painting, the top part was kind of white strokes of paint, maybe that I erased something. And it looked like, to me, it looked like the bottom of an iceberg on a dark ocean. And I thought, you know, what goes with an iceberg in the ocean? Well, the Titanic, like a history painting. And the Titanic, I realized, wasn't that hard to paint. Dots, stacks, and that began a long obsession with the dark ocean liner and the white iceberg, and the tension of seeing the two together. One geometric, one natural, one man-made, one organic. I did this idea over and over again. The ocean liner coming towards you, the ocean liner in a specific place, the ocean liner in a field of bright colors, the ocean liner coming out of a wall. A big painting of an ocean liner on a red sea with little sailboats coming out to meet it. A tiny ocean liner. You could hold this painting in your hand. I made it with acrylic paint. It's almost like an object, very minimal. And then I saw this yellow mattress on the sidewalk in Brooklyn. And I got my black paint and I did my ocean liner thing on it. And the next day it was carted away. But it was fun to do. This is a work on paper. I wanted to show that the big ship was very vulnerable. I had, and we all have in the past decade, seen things that should be steadfast topple over. Buildings, banks, countries, economic systems. And it's a sight to think that something like an ocean liner will fall over sideways. When I combined the swimmers with a boat, a kind of narrative was set up that I didn't expect. Were these group of swimmers who I intended to be women, and some people insisted looked like men, were they the crew of this boat? Were they in harm's way? Was this an enemy boat? I put kind of a otherworldly glow under the boat to show maybe that it was supernatural or mystical. It was a mystical boat. This boat is cresting on the horizon. Here's what it looks like close up. It's really strokes of paint. But I thought it gave the idea of a boat approaching you, which is kind of an anticipatory sight, a boat in the distance. Perhaps a ferry boat. Another ferry boat surrounded by islands of ice at night. A big painting, one of my most epic paintings. 6 dark little kind of rowboats coming towards you, and standing in them are figures that are dressed in wild colors. When you're painting the sea all the time, it gets kind of briny colored, blue-green, and I wanted those contrasting, very high-key day glow colors. So I was piling them up on top of the boat, and they started to look like figures, so I gave them fanciful hats. And they are out at midnight, perhaps. The title of this painting is Desire for Transport. Maybe it takes place in Maine. You can see islands in the distance. They're together performing some kind of ritual, and I didn't feel the need to explain what. Horses, and then when it came time to finish the top, I put in something I like to paint, which is a piano. And the reason I brought the piano into my work was if you start painting an ocean liner and it doesn't quite work out, it starts to look like a piano. So I had a lot of pianos peopling my painting. And there's the stage again, the curtains. People would say, well, why are there horses under a piano? And then I would ask them to explain to me why. Here's what happened to the idea of the theater stage. I put a black and white figure mysteriously dressed in a costume. This is standing in the spotlight and feeling maybe threatened a little by being alone and on stage. All the audience is looking up with expectations. And you're just in a funny costume. This is the Statue of Liberty and a sailor out in boats. Gouache, I use gouache when I work on paper, and some collage. Now we're up to present time. This is the painting I showed you right at the beginning of this talk. I did it last year. And I thought I'd put it chronologically. So you see how much it's about light. I did a series of these. The prow of a boat with strings of light coming down, and this one has 5 moons. And I painted the ground orange and pink, maybe influenced by Philip Guston. Fellini did a movie called Amarcord, and in the movie a big ocean liner floats into the scene, and it's decorated with lights almost like it's a Christmas tree, and I thought Fellini, being this great Italian romantic, had a terrific idea to take the ocean liner and have it draped with many, many little points of light. One of the most abstract paintings I've done, although it seems to have a night sky and a grassy bottom, I call it Midsummer Night. Perhaps these are insects, mushroom, a globe. And then I thought, well, maybe it was influenced by the way I always put my wood stove in New York when it's not being in Maine, when it's not being a wood stove. I would put the tomatoes on top of it, and they looked just so great. They needed to be ripened. The reason there are numbers, I found these numbers, and that was just something I wanted to look at. It occurred to me that I could make little boats and make videos. I was surrounded by people who were making videos, especially the summer I spent at Skowhegan. There were fewer painters and more video people. So this is a video I made telling the story of the Titanic, using what I had on hand. This was everything I was fascinated by with the Titanic story. The floating, the confrontation of iceberg with ship. And several of you have asked me since I've been here what it is about this that interests me. Did I have relatives on the Titanic? Did my parents throw me in front of an oncoming ship? Like, where'd all this come from? And those are good questions, and I've been trying to answer them to myself and to you all. But the fact is, it's something that comes from my visual store of images that I like to play with and put together. I think it's very beautiful. And, you know, I kind of edited out the fact that it was a tragedy and that people died. It's not like the Titanic movie, which was full of people. I stuck to the abstract shapes and to the floating in space, to the real sinking. That's what you can do when you're the producer and director of your own film. These are the little half-boat ships waiting to go in a show. An installation where I made cardboard boats and put them all over this cement floor. It's called High Water, cardboard, plaster, and paint. A piano jutting out of the wall. The top seemed kind of bare, so I had the Titanic heading right for the iceberg on top of the piano. This is another image that I play with, a stack of pancakes. I painted it large on a construction wall. This is the biggest painting I've ever done. Lots of fun. I came back a week later. The construction site, I guess, had taken the wall down to move some equipment in, and when they put it back up, they didn't even realize there was a painting on it. And then the next week was all gone. I was walking through a park last winter and, I had this urge to draw something. So with my glove, I started marking up the benches. And this was one of the drawings that I took a picture of. Snow drawing. Incidentally, you all, it's there for you to play around with. It's free. You can erase it. A diver, which, if you add color, turns into a Superman. Superman flying through the air. Superman with a trail of color. A big tanker ship. This is an Andrew Wyeth painting of a lobsterman hauling his trap out of the water. I looked at it and I thought it was the sappiest thing I've ever seen. But then I thought, I wish I'd painted that. It was so dramatic. This is about the phosphorescence in the water. As you can see, I took the idea with all the white dots. I'm going to go through these last slides quickly. This is up in a show now. Deep sea divers, see the little swimmers at the bottom. The brochure for a show I had at Bowdoin College Museum. And the last painting I'm going to show you is night swimmers, 2 barges, and divers diving off into the deep. Thank you very much.